We all know that language is important, that words are important. And religious leaders and politicians alike just pound the living daylights out of a selected few, like the word family. Ontario families, hard-working families, ordinary families, Christian families, and of course, family values. The way some people use the word, one could be forgiven for thinking that there is only one model of family that is in every way statistically average and has in all things identical challenges and needs. No distinction seems to be made between rich families and poor families, single-parent families, same-sex families, immigrant families. But as the Vanier Institute of the Family said in its report called Families Count, history teaches us that family has never been one thing to all people. When people use the word family or family values, they are engaging in what British writer Stephen Poole calls unspeak. Unspeak describes an attempt to say something without saying it, what some people call a dog whistle, without getting into an argument and therefore without having to justify what you say. At the same time, Poole says, it tries to unspeak, to erase or to silence any possible opposing point of view by laying a claim right at the start to only one way of looking at a certain issue. In common usage, the term family values has become shorthand, has become a dog whistle or unspeak for the heterosexual nuclear family with children and traditional gender roles. Rosemary Radford Ruther, in her book, Christianity and the Making of the Modern Family, calls them coded messages about women and how they should behave in relation to men. And others might add that these coded messages also are anti-single, anti-gay, anti-choice, anti-divorce, and anti-sex. Well, as you might assume, I have some arguments with these family values people. And my argument revolves around two things: family and values. So that about sums it up. In other words, how do we define family and who gets to define family? And secondly, what is it that we value in our familial relationships? The nuclear child-centered family has been called the traditional family. And it is traditional only insofar as it describes what has existed for the past 100 years or so. What seems to go unexamined, however, is the difference in models of family that have existed in earlier times, and how the idea of family changes along with the social, economical, and political forces of the day. In this sense, what we call the traditional family is a very modern creation. A number of years ago, the late Jerry Falwell, one of the self-appointed spokespersons for the religious right, defined family as the God-ordained institution of the marriage of one man and one woman together for a lifetime with their biological or adopted children. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that kind of a family. I grew up in that kind of a family, and look how I turned out. So I rest my case. But if you don't fit this definition of family, if you're single, or if you're widowed, or if you're divorced, if you're childless by choice or by circumstance, if you're gay or lesbian, if you live with a sibling or care for an aging parent, well, sorry, but you just don't fit in. You're not family. Such a definition renders virtually invisible a whole group of people whose real lives do not reflect that image. Families every bit as much in need of our support and our encouragement. Well, of course, there are other definitions of family, and here's another definition, a very different one, and this one comes from the United Church of Canada. By family, we mean two or more people who are joined together by reason of mutual consent, or by birth or adoption. Families are intended to provide a secure environment for nurture, growth, and development, and contribute to the spiritual, social, psychological, sexual, physical, and economic wholeness of its members. Responsible procreation is a primary function of many families, though this option is not open to some and not chosen by others. So obviously, a much more inclusive definition. So I guess one of the real questions is, who gets to do the defining? Who gets to say what a real family looks like? Because whoever gets to define the family has a great deal of power. And trust me, it's always about power. Defenders of that so-called traditional family, that definition, claim that one particular model of family is normative and has always been so, which of course is just not true. Any student of history knows that our modern understanding of family as a nuclear child-centered unit is a relatively recent development in Western society. Family is a cultural construct, one that has undergone multiple changes and transformations. And not surprisingly, these same people invariably point to the Bible as evidence that their idea of family is the correct, one and only, God-ordained one. And this is also a huge mistake, because in fact, the Bible, which for starters is steeped in a totally different cultural and historical and political context from ours, is packed with different models of family. There's a feminist theologian and author by the name of Virginia Rami Mollenkott, and she wrote a book called Sensuous Spirituality, Out from Fundamentalism. And in the appendix of that book, she lists 40 different forms of family that are mentioned or implied in the Bible, in either a positive way or a neutral way. 40. Married, polygamous, monogamous, single parent. I'm not going to do all 40. Same sex, celibate, unrelated adult sharing a home, related adult sharing a home, childless marriages, cohabitation without marriage, to name just a handful of the 40. And just one example will suffice, the story of Abraham and Sarah. And we know this story because Abraham and Sarah are the matriarch and the patriarch of not only the Christian faith, but also the Jewish faith. We know that Sarah was barren and had been barren for a long, long time. And so in order to give Abraham a son, because he was to be the father of many nations. That was the promise that was made to him. And so Sarah offered Abraham her servant girl, Hagar, so that Abraham could have a son with her, which he did. His name was Ishmael. And apparently, all of this was just hunkadory with God. Ironically, Jesus didn't have much good to say about family at all, at least not the notion of family that we're familiar with. In fact, at the wedding feast in Cana of Galilee, where Jesus performed his first miracle, turning water into wine, that's a good gig if you can get it. In that story, Jesus was actually really rude to his mother. I would never have gotten away speaking to my mother the way he spoke to his mother that day. And in this morning's reading from the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus dismisses his immediate family by saying, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And they're standing there right in front of him. And then pointing to his disciples, he says, "Here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." And at another time, talking about the cost of discipleship, Jesus actually says, and you can call it hyperbole, but he said it according to the Bible, "Unless you hate your own father and mother, your own wife and children, your own brothers and sisters, you cannot be my disciple." So don't be looking to Jesus for warm, fuzzy musings on the importance of family. To move on then to the second part of the family values equation, what are the values that we hold up as being important and crucial, maybe even non-negotiable in our family relationships today? We know what the family values people would say. The most important values seem to be heterosexuality, monogamy, procreation, roles defined by gender, Christian, man is the head of the household. Well, I don't know about you, but I can think of literally dozens of values that I would lift up as being crucial in family relationships, and they're almost entirely different from those. I would name things like mutuality, compassion, pleasure. What's the matter with pleasure? Justice, equality, security, life-giving, trustworthiness, companionship. And I'm sure that you could all add many more of your own. But I want to comment now on just three of those: fidelity, mutuality, and life-giving. Now, when most people hear the word fidelity, they think of monogamy. What I mean by fidelity can include monogamy, but it means much more than that. A theologian by the name of Jim Cotter says that to be faithful is to be full of faith, to be full of trust, to be willing to let love be vulnerable. This understanding of fidelity is not focused on one single physical act, but on the whole context of a relationship between people who trust each other and love each other. The biblical idea of covenant is helpful here. In the Bible, a covenant with God required much more than mere legalistic adherence to formal codes of behavior. The Hebrew prophets like Hosea and Amos and Micah, they are all very clear that the performance of ritual acts is meaningless unless it is consistent with what's in the heart. In the words of Micah, what does God require of us? Not offerings and sacrifices, not empty ritual and hollow promises, but justice, kindness, and humility. So God requires faithfulness over time, not the performance of a single specific act at one time. In this understanding of fidelity, relationships are forged over time through acts where love is given and received. And so we might define fidelity as a commitment to the struggle to love those with whom we are in relationship. The second value I chose was mutuality. Within our families, there is usually a sense of obligation that we feel toward those we love, and that's a good thing. When we commit ourselves to another person in a covenant, whether that means marrying a partner or choosing together to have children, we take on responsibilities to those other people. And so family members can expect a measure of commitment from us that others perhaps don't expect. A different kind of commitment, maybe, or a different degree of commitment. This is connected to our belief, or at least our hope, that in our families we are loved unconditionally. Now, for those of us raised on the TV shows of the 50s and 60s, and I know that some of you, there is a tremendous nostalgic appeal in this image of unconditional acceptance. No matter how many times the kids messed up, Father Knows Best always ended with a warm and affirming picture of the solidarity of the family unit. One can never imagine Ward and June Cleaver ever saying to Beaver, "I wish you'd never been born," or threatening to throw Wally out on the street because they caught him smoking pot, or because he told them he was gay. While today's TV shows may be more willing to admit that there are challenges within families, we still cling to these idealized visions of the family as a safe haven, a refuge from the nasty world, when we know, in fact, that terrible abuse and neglect often happens within families. Theologian Carter Hayward claims that mutuality is a process that involves the struggle to share power and work out inequality. It challenges us to think about the ways in which we allocate and share power in our relationships, and to be willing to renegotiate the balance of power when it's out of kilter. The third word that I chose to describe a value is the word life-giving. Now, one manifestation of life-giving is obviously and literally procreation. And as a parent myself, I can vouch for the fact that parenthood is both exasperating and frustrating and terrifying, and at the same time, fulfilling, rewarding, and maybe even sacramental. Now, I say sacramental now, but when my sons were teenagers and it was 4 o'clock in the morning and I didn't know where they were, sacramental is not the word that sprang to my lips. But there are other dimensions to what I mean by life-giving. One such dimension is simply creativity, the power to bring something new into existence, to transcend the limits imposed on us by other people, to create a new vision. When we enter into a relationship with another person, we are transformed. We're changed. We do not remain the same person we were before we entered into a relationship, whether it's with a partner or a family or our children. Through relationships, we come to a greater awareness of who we are and who we might become. We can also give life by providing a place where members of our families, both biological and chosen, can be themselves. We can also give life by providing hospitality to other people, especially to the outsider. Supported and encouraged and nurtured by our relationships, we can give life by going out from the security of our homes and our families to transform our communities by working for justice and dignity for all. Alternative family values. It's an interesting exercise to try to define, first of all, what we mean by family, and then secondly, to identify what we think are important values in our families and relationships. But it's more than just interesting. It's crucial because it's not just about my personal choices. The family is a political institution. Creating healthy families is not only about our personal satisfaction and fulfillment and well-being, it is also about the creation of a good community and a healthy society. Family stability, or the lack of it, has often been linked with political stability. We have been told, for example, that when women left the home in large numbers to enter the workforce, a host of social problems were unleashed. And what couldn't be blamed on women was blamed on gays and lesbians, what with our gay agenda and all. I hate it when everybody knows what's on the agenda except me. And I disagree with those who claim that all of the social problems we now face have arisen because we have stopped teaching those so-called traditional family values. I would like to suggest that those traditional family values are not able to address the problems of contemporary society. So a return to those values would be no cure to our social ills. The prescription, I think, is a new value system, one which is, I think, much more consistent and faithful to the gospel of Jesus Christ that we proclaim. One which is actually not new at all, but quite old. To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. Thanks be to God.